Screaming skull whistles, underground mercury rivers, entire cities sitting on the ocean floor. 33 times archaeologists dug into ancient legends expecting to find nothing, and pulled out proof instead. These are not myths that might have some truth to them. These are stories that mainstream historians called impossible for centuries until physical evidence shut them up completely. From frozen tattooed warriors to floating Roman palaces, every single legend on this list has been officially confirmed. The ancients were not exaggerating. We just stopped believing them. 1. The Aztecs had legends about warriors who carried the scream of 1,000 dead into battle. Historians assumed it was just poetic exaggeration, typical ancient trash talk to spook the enemy. Then archaeologists started pulling strange clay whistles shaped like human skulls out of Mexican burial sites. When someone finally decided to blow into one of these creepy little things, the room probably went very quiet very fast. The sound that came out was not a whistle, not a flute tone. It was a noise almost identical to a human being, screaming in absolute agony. Imagine hundreds of Aztec warriors charging at you, each one producing that nightmare frequency at the same time. The psychological warfare was real, people. The Aztecs literally weaponized the sound of suffering, and we have the receipts. 2. Everyone agreed Hannibal crossed the Alps with his elephants. That part was never in question. What historians could not agree on for over 2,000 years was exactly where he did it. Academics built entire careers arguing about mountain passes. Then a team of scientists decided to get creative and started looking for something very specific: ancient poop. They found it. A massive layer of horse and elephant dung, roughly 2,000 years old, exactly where the old legends said Hannibal's army marched through. Thousands of animals leave behind thousands of presents, and those presents stick around. Sometimes solving history's greatest mysteries does not require fancy technology. Sometimes you just need to find where 60,000 soldiers and 3 dozen elephants went to the bathroom. 3. The indigenous people of Flores Island in Indonesia told stories about the Ebu Gogo, little hairy people who lived in caves, stole food, and spoke in strange babbling voices. Folklorists nodded politely and filed it under cute local mythology. Then in 2003, archaeologists discovered skeletal remains of Homo floresiensis, a species of tiny humans standing about 3 feet tall who lived on that exact island until surprisingly recent times. The locals were not making things up. They were describing neighbors. These miniature humans coexisted with modern Homo sapiens for thousands of years, long enough to become embedded in oral tradition. Turns out when islanders tell you about little people in the mountains, maybe grab a notebook instead of dismissing them as superstitious. 4. The biblical cities of Sodom and Gomorrah, destroyed by fire and brimstone from heaven, sounded like a classic morality tale with added special effects. Then excavations at Tal el-Hammam in Jordan revealed something disturbing. Around 1650 BCE, this thriving Bronze Age city was obliterated in an instant. Pottery was flash melted. Human bones were scattered in patterns, suggesting extreme heat. The soil was loaded with salt and sulfur. The leading theory now suggests an airburst event, a meteor or comet fragment exploding in the atmosphere with the force of a nuclear bomb. The blast would have created temperatures hot enough to vaporize clothing and flesh, and the salt dispersal would have made the land unfarmable for centuries. Suddenly, fire from heaven sounds less like metaphor. 5. Ancient writers described Emperor Caligula's floating pleasure palaces on Lake Nemi, complete with marble floors, running water, and every luxury imaginable. For centuries, this was considered typical Roman gossip, exaggeration about a famously unhinged emperor. Then, Benito Mussolini, of all people, decided to drain the entire lake in the 1920s. What emerged from the mud were 2 massive ships, each over 200 feet long. They had mosaic floors, heated baths, bronze fittings, and sophisticated plumbing. These were literally floating mansions built for parties. Caligula really did construct ridiculous pleasure barges just because he could. The ancient gossip columnists were actually underselling it. Unfortunately, both ships were destroyed during World War II, but we got enough documentation to confirm the legend was absolutely real. 6. Indigenous peoples across the Americas told stories of enormous serpents, creatures so massive they could reshape the landscape itself. Scientists smiled and chalked it up to imagination. Then paleontologists discovered Titanoboa, a prehistoric snake that lived about 60 million years ago and measured over 40 feet long. This thing was essentially a school bus with scales. It weighed more than a ton and could swallow crocodiles whole. Now, humans never actually encountered Titanoboa since it went extinct long before we showed up. But the discovery proved that giant serpents were not fantasy. They existed. Whether ancient people found fossils or the stories somehow persisted through unknown means, the legend of the Great Serpent had a very real, very terrifying basis in natural history. 7. The Oracle at Delphi was the most prestigious fortune teller in the ancient world. Kings and generals traveled vast distances to hear the Pythia, the priestess, deliver prophecies from Apollo himself. She would enter a trance, inhale sacred vapors rising from the earth, and speak in riddles. Skeptics assumed the whole thing was theater. Then geologists examined the temple site and discovered two fault lines intersecting directly beneath the oracle's chamber. These fissures released ethylene gas, a sweet-smelling substance that causes euphoric trances and altered states of consciousness in low doses. The Pythia was literally getting high on geological emissions, while Greeks paid good money for her drug-induced ramblings. The gods were not speaking through her, but the earth definitely was. Ancient religion meets accidental intoxication. 8. For centuries, Homer's Iliad was classified alongside mythology. A decade-long war over a stolen woman, heroes fighting gods, wooden horses, clearly fiction. Then Heinrich Schliemann, a German businessman with more enthusiasm than formal training, announced he would find Troy. Academics laughed. Schliemann dug anyway, and in 1871 he uncovered the ruins of an actual ancient city at Heiserlich in modern Turkey. Multiple layers revealed repeated destruction, including one that matched the time frame of the legendary Trojan War. Troy was real. The walls were real. Something catastrophic happened there around 1180 BCE. Whether Helen's face launched any ships remains debatable, but Schliemann proved that Homer was not just spinning tales. He was writing about an actual place with an actual violent history. 9. Ancient Chinese texts describe the tomb of Emperor Qin Shi Huang as containing rivers of mercury flowing through a miniature landscape of his empire. This sounded like exactly the kind of legend rulers invent to make themselves sound impressive. Nobody builds underground mercury rivers. Then scientists conducted soil tests around the burial mound, which remains largely unexcavated. Mercury levels in the surrounding earth are approximately 100 times higher than normal. Something is producing massive amounts of mercury contamination from inside that tomb, and it has been doing so for over 2,000 years. The rivers might actually exist. China has not fully excavated the tomb yet, partly due to preservation concerns and partly because mercury is extremely toxic. The first emperor wanted to rule even in death, and he might still be floating on poisonous rivers down there. 10. Norwegian sailors told stories of the Kraken, a sea monster so enormous it could drag entire ships to the bottom of the ocean. The creature would rise from the depths, wrap its tentacles around vessels, and pull them under. Maritime mythology at its finest, researchers assumed. Except giant squids are real, and they are nightmare fuel. Architeuthis can grow up to 40 feet long with eyes the size of dinner plates. Sperm whales regularly surface covered in circular scars from giant squid suckers, proving these creatures fight back against predators weighing 50 tons. Their beaks can tear through flesh, and their tentacles are lined with serrated rings. Could a giant squid sink a ship? Probably not. But could terrified sailors encountering one in the dark ocean create the Kraken legend? Absolutely. 11. Everyone knows the legend of King Arthur pulling a sword from stone. But in Tuscany, Italy, there is an actual sword embedded in actual rock. and it has been there since the 12th century. Saint Galgano, a violent knight-turned-hermit, supposedly thrust his sword into a boulder as a symbol of renouncing warfare in 1180 CE. The sword remains there today, protected under glass in a chapel built around it. Recent analysis confirmed the metal composition matches 12th century metalworking. The break where it enters the stone shows no signs of welding or artificial attachment. Someone really did drive a sword into solid rock over 800 years ago. Whether divine intervention or excellent aim was involved, the Italian sword in the stone predates Arthurian literature and is completely authentic. 12. Greek writers described the Amazons, fierce warrior women who fought alongside men and scared the living daylights out of their male opponents. Historians assumed this was Greek anxiety about gender roles transformed into mythology. Then archaeologists started opening Scythian burial mounds along the Russian steppes. They found women buried with swords, spears, bows, and daggers. Women with healed combat injuries indicating they had survived serious battles. Women whose leg bones were bowed from a lifetime of horseback riding. These were not ceremonial items placed with decorative princesses. These were warriors who trained, fought, bled, and died in combat. Herodotus, that ancient Greek historian everyone accused of exaggeration, was telling the truth about the Amazons. They rode, they fought, and they were very real. 13. Pontius Pilate, the Roman official who sentenced Jesus to crucifixion, appeared only in religious texts for a very long time. No Roman records, no archaeological evidence, just Gospels. Some scholars suggested he might be a literary invention, a convenient villain created by early Christian writers. Then in 1961, archaeologists excavating a Roman theater in Caesarea Maritima found a limestone block with Latin inscription mentioning Pontius Pilatus, prefect of Judea. Just like that, a biblical figure jumped from scripture into documented Roman history. The stone was being reused as a building material, meaning someone grabbed an official dedication and repurposed it for construction. Pilate was real, held exactly the title the Bible claimed, and governed exactly where the Gospels placed him. Case closed. 14. Maya civilization collapsed around 900 CE, and for centuries nobody could explain why. Maya legends spoke of angry gods and punishments from heaven. Mainstream archaeology looked for wars, invasions, and political chaos. Then scientists started analyzing cave formations, specifically stalagmites, which record rainfall patterns in their mineral layers like tree rings. What they found was terrifying. The Maya heartland experienced a series of devastating megadroughts lasting decades, with rainfall dropping by up to 70% during critical periods. Cities that depended on seasonal agriculture simply could not survive. The gods were not angry. The sky just stopped providing water. The Maya collapse was climate change before climate change was a phrase anyone used. The legends about divine punishment were people trying to explain why their world was ending through the only framework they had. 15. The Roman writer Suetonius described Nero's Golden House as containing a rotating dining room that turned continuously day and night like the heavens themselves. Historians considered this theatrical nonsense, the kind of description designed to emphasize imperial decadence. How would ancient Romans even build such a mechanism? Then excavations in Rome discovered the remains of a circular structure with an ingenious system of spheres and water pressure designed to rotate the floor while guests dined above. The mechanism worked using water flowing beneath the chamber, essentially creating a rotating platform powered by hydraulics. Nero actually built a spinning restaurant in the 1st century CE. When ancient sources describe Roman emperors doing something ridiculous, maybe the default assumption should be that it happened exactly as described. 16. Norse sagas described Leif Erikson sailing west from Greenland and discovering a land he called Vinland, where wild grapes grew and the winters were mild. For centuries, this was classified as Viking mythology, stories told around fires to entertain. Then, in 1960, archaeologists discovered L'Anse aux Meadows in Newfoundland, Canada. The site contained unmistakable Norse artifacts. turf buildings matching Icelandic construction styles, iron rivets, a bronze cloak pin, and evidence of metalworking unknown to indigenous populations. Vikings reached North America around 1000 CE, roughly 500 years before Columbus was even born. The sagas were not fiction. They were travel logs passed down through generations with remarkable accuracy. Europeans discovered America twice, and the first time they just forgot to tell anyone outside Scandinavia. 17. The legend of the Minotaur tells of a terrible monster trapped in an inescapable maze beneath the palace of King Minos on Crete. When archaeologist Arthur Evans excavated Knossos in the early 1900s, he uncovered a palatial complex so vast and convoluted that the labyrinth suddenly made sense. Over 1,000 interconnected rooms, multiple stories, corridors that turned back on themselves, and staircases leading nowhere created a structure that would genuinely confuse anyone unfamiliar with its layout. Ancient visitors from simpler Greek settlements would have found Knossos impossibly complex, a building that could swallow you whole. Add the Minoan tradition of bull worship, produced images of bull-headed figures, and you have all the ingredients for the Minotaur myth. The monster might be fictional, but the maze was absolutely real. 18. The Bible mentions the Hittites repeatedly as a powerful regional force interacting with Israelites and Egyptians. For centuries, historians pointed out that no evidence of any Hittite empire existed outside Scripture. This was used to question biblical historical reliability. Then excavations at Hattusa in modern Turkey revealed a massive fortified capital city with temples, palaces, and tens of thousands of clay tablets. The Hittites were not a minor tribe. They were a superpower that rivaled Egypt, invented iron weapons technology, and conducted international diplomacy across the ancient Near East. Their empire had simply been forgotten so thoroughly that only the Bible remembered them. Sometimes religious texts preserve history that secular sources lost completely. The Hittites went from biblical footnote to archaeological sensation literally overnight. 19. The Quran mentions Iram of the Pillars, a wealthy city destroyed for its arrogance, which subsequently vanished into the desert sands. For centuries, Ubar, the legendary Atlantis of the Sands, existed only in Arabian mythology. Then NASA satellite imagery revealed ancient caravan routes converging on a single point in the Omani Desert. Excavations at that location uncovered a fortified settlement that had collapsed into an underlying limestone cavern, swallowed by the earth itself. The city had controlled the frankincense trade for centuries before literally falling into a sinkhole around 300 CE. The legend of a proud city destroyed and swallowed by the desert was not metaphor. It was a geological event passed down through storytelling. Sometimes the ground really does open up and eats your civilization whole. 20. Herodotus wrote that Scythian warriors covered their bodies with elaborate tattoos depicting animals and mythical creatures. Without photographic evidence, this seemed like another Greek exaggeration about strange barbarians. Then the permafrost of Siberia started giving up its secrets. Mummies recovered from Pazyryk burial mounds emerged with their skin remarkably preserved by ice, and that skin was covered in intricate tattoos. Deer, griffins, fish, and geometric patterns wrapped around arms, legs, and torsos in sophisticated artistic styles. These were not crude markings. They were genuine artwork executed with incredible skill over 2,000 years ago. Herodotus saw tattooed Scythians, wrote down what he observed, and was called a liar for millennia. The frozen dead finally testified on his behalf, and their testimony was literally written on their bodies. 21. Chinese civilization traces its origin to Emperor Yu, a legendary figure who supposedly tamed a catastrophic flood around 1900 BCE. Historians assume this was foundation mythology, a standard ancient trope about a hero defeating chaos. Then geologists found evidence of an actual apocalyptic flood along the Yellow River. Around 1920 BCE, an earthquake triggered a massive landslide that dammed the river at Jishi Gorge. When that natural dam eventually burst, It released one of the largest floods in human history, sending water cascading across the plains below. The timing matches. The location matches. The scale matches legendary descriptions. Emperor Yu might be mythologized, but the flood he supposedly conquered was absolutely real. Sometimes founding myths remember genuine catastrophic events that shaped civilizations. 22. The Bible describes King Solomon's legendary wealth, including vast quantities of copper and bronze for temple construction. Solomon's mines sounded like wishful thinking, ancient propaganda about a golden age that probably never existed. Then, excavations at Timnah Valley in southern Israel revealed enormous copper mining operations dating precisely to the 10th century BCE, exactly when Solomon would have ruled. The scale of these mines suggests organized state-level resource extraction rather than small tribal operations. Thousands of tons of copper were pulled from these hills during the supposed Solomonic period. Whether Solomon himself existed as described remains debatable, but whoever controlled Israel during that era was running industrial-level mining operations. The legendary mines have foundations in archaeological reality. 23. Homer's Odyssey describes Scylla and Charybdis as twin terrors guarding a narrow strait. Scylla was a cliff-dwelling monster who snatched sailors, while Charybdis was a deadly whirlpool that swallowed ships whole. This sounds like pure monster mythology until you actually visit the Strait of Messina between Italy and Sicily. Powerful currents meeting in the narrow passage create genuine whirlpools that ancient vessels would have struggled to navigate. The rocky coastline features caves and overhangs that would produce strange echoes and shadows. Ancient sailors navigating by oar and sail, unable to predict current patterns, experienced something genuinely frightening in this strait. They translated that fear into monster stories, but the underlying danger was completely real. Sometimes monsters are just geography nobody understood yet. 24. Viking sagas mentioned sunstones, magical crystals that could locate the sun even through clouds or fog, enabling navigation when the sky was entirely overcast. This sounded like fantasy until scientists examined Icelandic spar, a transparent calcite crystal that polarizes light. When you hold this crystal up toward the sky and rotate it, the optical properties change based on the sun's position. Even when the sun itself is invisible, it actually works. Vikings could genuinely have used these crystals for navigation in the notoriously cloudy North Atlantic. A sunstone was even found in an Elizabethan shipwreck, suggesting the technology persisted for centuries. The magic crystal was physics that ancient people discovered without understanding why it worked. Magic is often just science nobody has explained yet. 25. Ancient Greek and Egyptian texts mentioned Heraklion, also called Thonis, a magnificent port city at the mouth of the Nile. As centuries passed without any trace of this city, scholars assumed it was fictional or grossly exaggerated. Then, underwater archaeologists discovered an entire metropolis sitting on the Mediterranean seabed near Alexandria. Temples, statues over 16 feet tall, ships, gold coins, and inscriptions emerged from the murky water. Heraklion had sunk due to earthquakes and rising sea levels sometime around the 8th century CE, preserving it in underwater sediment. The city was not imaginary. It was submerged. Ancient port facilities, religious complex, and residential areas lay perfectly preserved beneath the waves, waiting over 1,000 years for someone to look in the right place. 26. The Shang dynasty ruled China around 1600 to 1046 BCE, according to traditional chronology, but for years historians considered it semi-legendary. No archaeological confirmation existed. Then farmers started finding strange bones covered in archaic writing. These oracle bones were used for divination, with questions carved into turtle shells or animal bones, which were then heated until they cracked. The cracks provided answers from ancestors or gods. More importantly, the inscriptions included lists of Shang kings matching traditional genealogies almost exactly. A dynasty historians doubted had existed left behind thousands of written records proving their royal succession. The oracle bones transformed the Shang from legend into documented history, pushed Chinese writing back by centuries, and prove that sometimes traditional histories preserve more truth than academics assumed. 27. European conquistadors spent decades searching for El Dorado, the legendary city of gold. They never found it because they misunderstood the legend. El Dorado was not a place, it was a person. The Muisca people of Colombia practiced a coronation ritual where their new chief was covered in gold dust and then paddled into Lake Guatavita to wash it off as an offering to the gods. A golden raft depicting exactly this ceremony was discovered in 1969, showing a figure surrounded by attendants on a ceremonial vessel. The raft confirmed the ritual was real. Spanish greed transformed a religious ceremony about one golden man into fantasies about endless golden cities. They were chasing a mistranslation while the actual golden one was a temporary state, not a permanent address. 28. The Hebrew Bible describes the Assyrian siege of Lachish, a Judean fortress city attacked by King Sennacherib around 701 BCE. This could have been religious storytelling until archaeologists found two forms of confirmation. First, massive stone reliefs discovered in Sennacherib's palace at Nineveh depicted the siege in extraordinary detail, showing Assyrian soldiers attacking walls, deportees being led away, and impaled prisoners. Second, excavations at Lachish itself revealed a destruction layer from exactly this period, complete with evidence of siege warfare. Arrowheads, sling stones, and a massive Assyrian siege ramp all matched the carved depictions. The biblical account, the Assyrian propaganda, and the archaeological evidence all tell the same story. When three independent sources agree, you have confirmed history. 29. Hindu texts describe Dvaraka, the magnificent kingdom of Lord Krishna, which sank beneath the ocean after his death. This sounded like religious mythology, the kind of story cultures tell about lost golden ages. Then marine archaeologists discovered submerged structures off the coast of Gujarat, India. Stone walls, anchors, and artifacts emerged from exploration of the Arabian seafloor near the legendary site. Dating remains controversial, but the presence of an actual underwater settlement where mythology placed one is remarkable. Some researchers argue these ruins date back thousands of years, potentially aligning with legendary timelines. Whether this is literally Krishna's kingdom or simply an ancient port that inspired the story, the core legend of a drowned city in that exact location contains archaeological truth. 30. King Midas of Phrygia, famous for his legendary golden touch, was always placed somewhere between history and myth. Then archaeologists excavated a massive burial mound at Gordion in Turkey and found a royal tomb from the 8th century BCE. The occupant was almost certainly Midas himself, or possibly his father. Here is the twist. There was no gold. Not a single golden object in the entire burial chamber. Instead, the tomb contained an elaborate funeral feast with bronze cauldrons, wooden furniture, and the remains of a sophisticated meal including lamb, lentils, and a spiced alcoholic beverage. The man famous for turning everything to gold was buried without any. Either the legend was pure fiction or someone has a wonderful sense of ironic humor about funeral arrangements. 31. The ancient Greek historian Herodotus described an engineering marvel on the island of Samos. A tunnel cut straight through a mountain from both ends simultaneously, meeting perfectly in the middle. Built around 530 BCE by engineer Eupalinos, this seemed impossible. How could ancient workers calculate precise trajectories through solid rock without modern surveying equipment? Yet the tunnel of Eupalinos exists. It stretches over a kilometer through limestone, and the two digging teams met with only minor course corrections. The acoustic and geometric methods used remain subjects of scholarly debate, but the achievement is undeniable. Ancient engineering capabilities regularly exceeded what modern people assumed possible. Herodotus described what he saw, experts called it exaggeration, and the mountain kept the truth hidden inside until excavation proved everyone wrong. 32. The Tower of Babel story describes humanity building a tower to reach heaven, before God scrambled their languages and scattered them across the earth. The actual structure behind this legend was almost certainly Etemenanke, a Babylonian ziggurat dedicated to the god Marduk. Ancient sources describe it as reaching approximately 300 feet tall with 7 terraced levels, making it one of the largest structures in the ancient world. Archaeological remains confirm its massive foundation pit in Babylon. The tower was real and genuinely enormous by ancient standards. Workers from across the Babylonian Empire, speaking numerous languages, would have labored together on construction. A tower that touched the sky, where countless languages mingled. The myth captured something that actually existed, just with divine intervention edited in later. 33. Nearly every ancient civilization has a flood story, from Noah to Gilgamesh to Manu. Skeptics dismiss these as universal mythology until geologists propose the Black Sea Deluge hypothesis. Around 5600 BCE, the Mediterranean Sea may have catastrophically breached into what was then a smaller freshwater lake, flooding coastal settlements with rising water that would not stop for months. Survivors would have fled in every direction, carrying stories of the world drowning. Whether this specific event created the flood myths remains debated, but regional megafloods absolutely happened, and they absolutely traumatized the civilizations that survived them. The story of divine punishment through water might be humanity's collective memory of actual drowning, passed down through millennia until nobody remembered which flood was the original one. 33 confirmed legends, and I guarantee we missed some. You know that one ancient story from your country, your culture, your grandmother? The one that sounds absolutely insane but turned out to be real. The one that should have made this list but didn't? That is what I want in the comments. Which confirmed legend did we completely overlook? Call us out. Prove you know something we missed. If this made you trust ancient stories a little more, hit like. Subscribe if you want more history that sounds fake but isn't.